Hi, everyone. Happy New Year. This week's insight involves polarized or dichotomous thinking, especially as it relates to self experience. After my last video on the concept of the false self, I noticed some comments expressing distress and confusion about what parts of self experience can be considered, quote, true, and what parts should be considered, quote, false. Concepts like this can be misleading because they seem to suggest that self experience can or should be chopped into pieces, separating the good or true parts while discarding the bad or false parts. But that's not really how it works. It's important to recognize that even our best psychological models are really vast oversimplifications. When it comes to parts of the self, the answer is almost always both and rather than either or. In clinical psychology, we describe behaviors and feelings as overdetermined, and that means that they arise from multiple sources simultaneously. It's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to isolate a single cause for any given internal experience. There will always be layers and layers of complexity. Instead of seeking certainty, we generate narratives, working models, and we evaluate how well those narratives or models resonate with both the facts and the subjective experience of the individual. And we do this with the awareness that no narrative can fully capture the whole truth. Similarly, just as thoughts, feelings, and behaviors arise from multiple simultaneous causes, they also serve multiple simultaneous functions. Even a simple behavior like eating can serve many functions at the same time, from regulating emotions to strengthening attachment bonds to expressing feelings like aggression to satiating hunger and distracting from discomfort. When we try to describe the complexity of internal experience, language inevitably falls short. Models of personality and emotion are just that. They're models. They're approximations, abstractions that help us make sense of experience and identify patterns, but they should never be taken as literal representations of reality. Concepts like the true and false self are best understood this way, as tools that describe subjective dynamics. When we talk about a, quote, false self, we're describing the development of an implicit narrative, a kind of unconscious story, about who a person believes they must be, often shaped by external pressures rather than emerging organically from authentic emotional discovery. The falseness of it lies in the way that the self was constructed around the expectations of other people rather than out of a genuine exploration of one's emotional life. But this idea shouldn't be taken as an absolute. It's a flexible framework, and it's only useful insofar as it helps us to make sense of an individual's lived experience and observable patterns. The danger comes when we try to treat these concepts as literal truths, because it tends to lead to rigid self judgments rather than openness to complexity. I often hear from patients who agonize over whether an act of kindness or charity was, quote, truly selfless. They worry that noticing any selfish motivation whatsoever within such an act will negate the value of their actions or mean that they lack a true self altogether and that they're really only capable of manipulation or exploitation. These concerns are often rooted in stigmatizing portrayals of NPD that they've seen online. But the distress that they create often reflects a deeper difficulty tolerating ambiguity. The truth is, all acts of charity have a selfish component. It would be impossible for it to be otherwise, and that's okay. Kind actions also bring you feelings of fulfillment or satisfaction. And just because it feels good to be kind doesn't negate the possibility of true kindness. The problem only arises when we impose a polarized, all or nothing lens onto the experience, demanding purity in a way that ends up disconnecting us from our complexity. Identity, thought, feeling, and behavior are not dichotomous. They're the products of dynamic influences. Authenticity and inauthenticity are always intertwined. You might be wondering then, what is the value of diagnosis? Why even engage in self-reflection if we can't ever fully know the truth about our internal world? To a certain extent, within each of us there exists a subjective world that is forever unknowable to other people. So, we work with abstractions, tools like case studies or statistical analysis and theoretical models. There are limits to what we can know about each other, and there are also limits to what we can know about ourselves. But this doesn't make self-reflection futile. On the contrary, it challenges us to become more comfortable with ambiguity and imperfection and not knowing. Paradoxically, it's often within this acceptance of the unknown that we find both meaning and beauty. Every internal experience contains a blend of good and bad, authentic and inauthentic, true and false. Psychological health involves tolerating this complexity rather than attempting to strip the self of contradiction. In fact, many forms of psychological distress arise from exactly that attempt to rid the self of ambivalence and reduce complex experience to a single, solitary valence. We call this black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking, or polarized thinking. And when such processes occur at the level of identity, we call it splitting. Healing shouldn't involve passing judgment on what is right or wrong, true or false. It's more about gradually discovering what feels meaningful and true, not in a binary sense, but as part of a richer, more intricate tapestry of experience. Now, I'm aware that even in what I'm saying here, there's contradiction. On the one hand, I'm discussing theories and models that categorize internal experience. On the other hand, I'm emphasizing that such categorization is ultimately incomplete, and that psychological maturity and health involves learning to hold complexity and ambivalence. So how can these ideas be reconciled? Like I said earlier, it's both and, not either or. Psychological theories and models help us to approximate how the mind seems to work. But if we attempt to dissect our own subjectivity in search of definitive truths, we will inevitably reach an impasse. That's the nature of being a subject, a self. If you were an object, then such dissection would be simple. But you're a subject, a dynamic, evolving process that can't be reduced to parts. By embracing both what we can know and the mystery of what we cannot, we move closer to the fullness of what it means to be human. Okay, so that's it for this week. If you'd like to receive insights like this on a weekly basis, consider becoming a paid member of the channel. Your support is deeply appreciated and helps me continue creating content like this. Until next time, take good care.